My name is Pat Riley, and for almost 20 years, I was the calm voice in the darkness for the citizens of Philadelphia. I wasn't a street cop. I was a 911 operator. My battlefield was a console with 6 monitors in a windowless room in the basement of City Hall. I was the first line of contact between panic and relief. I heard everything, from the last breaths of gunshot victims to the screams of mothers whose children weren't breathing. My job was to extract information from the chaos, to be an anchor of sanity. I learned to dissociate my empathy from the words I heard, turning tragedies into codes and addresses. But there are voices that time doesn't erase, echoes trapped in the radio waves. And one of those voices reached me from 40 years in the past and destroyed the wall I had built around my mind. Being a 911 operator is a special kind of hell. You are a powerless spectator to the worst that humanity has to offer. You hear the horror, but you never see it. You hear the relief when the sirens arrive, but you never feel the embrace of a life saved. It's a job of ghosts, of voices in the ether. To survive, you become a machine. Location, nature of the emergency, name, description. Repeat. Over time, the voices blend into a constant hum of pain. I was good at filtering out the noise, at focusing on what mattered. At least, until I started hearing things on the dead frequencies. It all began as static with form. In the silence between calls, I'd hear fragments, a quick scream, a single word like help, the sound of breaking glass, things that lasted less than a second. My colleagues heard nothing. It's just crossed radio frequencies, Pat. The city is old. The wiring is a nightmare. I accepted the explanation. It was easier than admitting I was hearing echoes of past tragedies, as if the strongest emotions had etched themselves onto the very radio waves that permeate the city. I tried to ignore it, turned up the volume on my headset to drown out the static, but the voices were getting clearer. The night that ruined me was a rainy Tuesday in November, an unusual lull. Suddenly, line 4 lit up. The connection was terrifyingly clear, without the usual digital compression, almost like an old landline call. The voice belonged to a woman, panting, terrified. "He's in the house. He broke the back window. Please help me." She gave me an address, 1288 Callow Hill Street. I typed as I kept her on the line. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "He's coming up the stairs. Oh, God!" she screamed, followed by the sound of splintering wood and a final scream that was abruptly cut off. The line went dead. I dispatched all available units. Home invasion in progress. Possible assault. The response from the officers on scene froze my blood. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. The address 1288 Callow Hill doesn't exist. It's Lot 72. It's a parking lot. It's been a parking lot for at least 20 years. My supervisor pulled me off the console. They thought it was an elaborate prank, a swatting. But the call didn't have the digital markers of a cell or VoIP call. It seemed to have come from nowhere. I became obsessed. On my own time, I went to the city archives, and I found it. In 1978, there was a house at 1288 Callow Hill. It was the site of a brutal, unsolved murder. A young woman named Eleanor Vance was killed by an intruder. The house was demolished in the 90s and became Lot 72. I took my findings to my supervisor. I showed him the old case report, the details of the break-in through the back window, the struggle on the stairs. They were identical to the call I had received. He looked at me with deep pity and sent me home, placing me on mandatory leave. The story spread through the dispatch center. I was the guy who took a ghost call. Nobody believed me. They thought I had finally cracked under the pressure. that my mind had fabricated the scenario from a case I might have read about somewhere. I could never sit at a console again. Every crackle of static sounded like a plea for help from another time. I started hearing the voices everywhere, on the car radio, on the TV, on the phone. Echoes of pain that no one else could hear. I could no longer distinguish between the emergencies of the present and the tragedies of the past. The job I did to save lives had become a source of psychological torture. After a year of therapy and medication that left me in a constant fog, I quit. Now I live in almost absolute silence. No radio, no TV. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I can still hear the terrified voice of Eleanor Vance asking for help that arrived 40 years too late.
My name is David Chen, and I was a good detective. LAPD homicide. For 10 years, I lived and breathed the job. My gift was seeing patterns where others saw chaos. A crime scene to me was a puzzle, and I was addicted to the satisfaction of clicking the last piece into place, which was usually a pair of handcuffs on a killer's wrists. I was skeptical, methodical, and only believed in what could be proven, bagged, and tagged. My reality was defined by yellow police tape. Everything changed with the case we nicknamed The Artist. He not only introduced me to evil in its purest form, but he also taught me that evil leaves a stain, a residual energy that can cling to objects and to people. Now, I can't touch a family photo without a paralyzing fear, and I put on imaginary latex gloves to pick up a glass of water. Early in my career, it was all about procedure. Collect evidence, interview witnesses, build a case. I had a reputation for being cold, detached, but it was a defense mechanism. I didn't let the brutality of the job get to me. I saw the victims as the center of the puzzle, not as people whose lives were horribly cut short. It was the only way to stay sane in the midst of so much carnage. Los Angeles at night is a different animal. Beneath the Hollywood glimmer, there's a darkness that devours souls, and my job was to sift through the remains. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. I never expected that one day the remains would start talking back. It all started with the Artist case, a serial killer who posed his victims in grotesque, artistic tableaus, like macabre sculptures. He was a ghost. No DNA, no fingerprints, no witnesses. The only thing we had were the objects he left behind at the scenes. A single earring, a paperback book, a broken watch. They were all kept in evidence locker 1138. The first time it happened, I was examining the watch. The moment my gloved fingers touched the cold metal, an image exploded in my mind. A woman's face, her eyes wide with terror, and the sound of a low, guttural laugh. I dropped the watch, my heart hammering. My partner Frank asked if I was okay. I said yes, it was just a twitch, the coffee. A lie. The phenomenon intensified. Every time I handled an item from locker 1138, I got flashes, sensory fragments from the victim's final hours. I would smell one's perfume, taste the metallic fear in another's mouth, feel the rough chafe of a rope on a wrist. And always, underneath it all, was the killer's presence. I didn't see his face, but I felt his smugness, his pleasure, his cold, methodical madness. I started using these visions in the investigation. I would guess details I had no way of knowing. He's an organized man, almost OCD. Check library records for checkouts on Renaissance art, I'd say in briefings. Frank would look at me with growing suspicion. I was getting results, but I was becoming erratic, obsessed. The turning point was when I picked up a small butterfly brooch. The image that came was different. This time I saw through the killer's eyes. I saw my own hands, his hands, closing around the victim's throat. I felt the sick thrill, the power, the darkness churning inside me. I screamed and threw the brooch across the room. When I turned, Frank and the captain were in the doorway, watching me with looks I would never forget. I tried to explain, stammering about the evidence, about the impressions they left. I sounded completely insane. From that moment on, I was a problem to be managed. The investigation was taken from me, but the visions didn't stop. They started happening without the objects. I saw the victims in the hallways of the precinct, the killer's face in the reflections of windows. They caught the artist 2 months later, thanks to an anonymous tip. He was a librarian, just as I had predicted. During the interrogation, he smiled at me through the one-way glass, a knowing smile, as if he knew we had shared something intimate and terrible. That was the final straw. I was placed on psychiatric leave. The diagnosis was stress-induced psychosis. To the department, I was a brilliant detective who flew too close to the sun and got burned. To me, I was the man who touched evil and was infected by it. I never went back. The thought of touching anything that belonged to someone else fills me with an indescribable dread. I live a life of self-imposed isolation. The meds create a barrier, a filter, but they don't erase the memories. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still feel that cold, sick power stirring in the back of my mind, and I wonder how much of David Chen is left and how much of the artist, Evidence Locker 1138, left behind inside me.
My name is Jean-Luc Boudreau. For 15 years, I was a sheriff's deputy in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. My office was a white Ford Explorer, and my territory was a web of gravel roads, dark swamps, and small communities where everyone knew your grandfather's name. I was a man of the law and a man of the swamp. I understood the flow of the tides and the ebb and flow of local crime. I believed in things that could be handcuffed, photographed, and presented to a jury. But the bayou has its own secrets, older than any man-made law. And one night, while searching for a missing child, one of those secrets found me. Now I live in an apartment in Baton Rouge, hundreds of miles from the smell of mud and cypress, and the sound of running water gives me panic attacks. The swamp took that child, and in return, it took my mind. The first few years were idyllic, as much as they can be for a cop. I dealt with land disputes, poachers, and the occasional bar fight. The night shift was quiet, almost meditative. The sound of insects and frogs was the soundtrack to my patrol. I felt like a guardian, protecting the threshold between the civilized world and the wild, indifferent nature. The danger was physical. Alligators on the road, venomous snakes, drunk men with shotguns. It was a danger I understood, one I could confront. I never imagined the real terror wouldn't come from something that could bite or shoot me, but from something that could simply show me. The darkness of the swamp is different from the darkness of a city. It doesn't hide evil, it nurtures it. The strangeness began with the fée follets, the ghost lights of local folklore. The old-timers always talked about them, saying they were the spirits of unbaptized children who led travelers to their doom. I had always dismissed them as swamp gas or bioluminescent insects, until they started appearing to me. Little spheres of pale blue light dancing over the dark water, always in my peripheral vision during night patrols. They seemed to watch me, to follow me. I felt watched, not by a person, but by the swamp itself. Sometimes my patrol car's radio would emit a strange sound, like the cry of a baby submerged in water, before returning to normal. I checked the equipment, blamed the humidity, atmospheric interference. I found every logical excuse because the alternative was unthinkable. The call that broke everything was for an 8-year-old girl, Lily, who had vanished from her backyard at dusk. The search was massive. Volunteers, dogs, helicopters. By the third night, hope was draining away, turning into cold despair. I was patrolling a remote area of levees and canals alone, cutting through the darkness with my headlights. That's when the lights appeared again. Not one or two, but dozens of them, pulsing in unison over a specific spot in the middle of the canal. They were no longer dancing. They were stationary, waiting. An icy chill ran down my spine. Against all my training and instinct, I stopped the truck, grabbed my flashlight, and started walking towards them, with muddy water rising to my knees. The lights hovered over the water, illuminating the surface with a ghostly glow. And then the images came, not as a vision, but as a direct imprint on my mind. I saw through Lily's eyes, the red swing set in the yard, the yellow butterfly she followed to the water's edge, the slip in the mud, the sudden fall into the cold, dark water. I felt her panic, the water filling her lungs, the darkness enveloping her. It was a second of absolute terror that seemed to last an eternity. I screamed and pointed my flashlight to the exact spot beneath the lights, and there it was, a small piece of her pink dress caught on a submerged branch. I plunged into the water, already knowing what I would find. The next morning, I was a hero, the deputy who never gave up, who found the poor girl. But when my captain asked me how I knew where to look, I couldn't lie. I told him about the lights, about the vision, about feeling the girl's last moments. The heroism in his eyes was replaced by a mixture of pity and concern. The story spread like wildfire. The voodoo deputy, the bayou ghost hunter. My colleagues treated me with an uncomfortable caution, as if I might break at any moment. They stopped asking me out for drinks after a shift. I became an outcast, the man who stared too long into the swamp's darkness and let it stare back. I couldn't patrol at night anymore. Every cypress shadow looked like a human figure. Every reflection on the water was a pair of eyes watching me. The lights followed me, and now whispers came with them, voices of the many souls the swamp had claimed over the centuries. I requested a transfer to desk duty, but it was too late. The mark was on me. After 6 months of medical leave and conflicting diagnosis, I resigned. Today, antidepressants keep the worst of the darkness at bay, but I've never gone back. I know the swamp remembers me, and sometimes, when the humidity is high, I still see little blue lights dancing in the corner of my eye.
My name is Jack Harlan, and this was my last day as a police officer on the night shift in Louisiana, a state where danger lurks around every shadowy corner in New Orleans, with its mix of violent crime and voodoo legends that seem to come alive after sunset. I started my career 10 years ago, fresh out of the academy, full of idealism and adrenaline. Louisiana has always been dangerous. Sky-high homicide rates in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, gangs, drugs, and constant shootouts. I volunteered for the night shift because I thought I could make a difference, patrolling dark streets where ordinary citizens feared to tread. At first, it was thrilling, arresting dealers, car chases ending in handcuffs, and the camaraderie with colleagues who became like family. But nothing prepared me for what was coming. I was a die-hard skeptic, raised in a Catholic family but without believing in ghosts or spirits. I thought job stress was just that, stress, until the nights started to change.
It all began subtly, about a year after I joined the force. During solo patrols in abandoned neighborhoods near the bayou, I'd hear distant screams echoing as if from inside my head. At first, I thought they were echoes of real fights or wild animals, but they became more frequent. Voices whispering my name, low laughter that made my heart race. One night, while investigating a disturbance call at an old house in the French Quarter, I heard a child's cry coming from the empty basement. I went down the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand, and the sound stopped abruptly, leaving only oppressive silence. When I reported it to the sergeant, he laughed and said it was fatigue, but I knew it wasn't. The voices started following me home, waking me from dreams where I saw shadowy figures hovering over bloody bodies. Louisiana, with its history of slavery and occult rituals, seemed to fuel these hallucinations. Or were they real? I began doubting my sanity, but I kept working, thinking it was just the night shift wearing me down.
Over time, the supernatural experiences intensified, turning my job into a living nightmare. Patrolling alone at night on isolated roads near swamps, I'd see shadows moving among the trees, shapes that looked like deformed humans. Once, responding to a fatal car accident on a dark highway, I heard voices murmuring ancient Creole prayers as paramedics removed the bodies. I convinced myself it was early PTSD, common among cops in violent states like Louisiana, where we see more deaths in a month than most do in a lifetime. But the voices didn't stop. Help us. They're coming. Echoes that made me break out in a cold sweat. I started avoiding certain neighborhoods, like the lower Ninth Ward, where legends of hurricane spirits seemed real. My colleagues noticed my unease, but I denied it, fearing I'd be labeled unstable. The night shift in Louisiana is brutal. Assaults, overdoses, shootouts, and I thought it was breaking me. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come in an incident that would change everything.
It was on a rainy autumn night, responding to a homicide in a stinking alley behind a bar in New Orleans. The call was routine. Victims stabbed multiple times, probably a gang settling scores. I arrived first at the scene, the body still warm, blood mixing with rainwater puddles. As I secured the area, I saw something impossible. A translucent form rising from the corpse like mist, shaping into the silhouette of the dead man. His empty eyes stared at me, and I heard his voice in my mind. It was his brother, jealousy over a woman. He caught me off guard. I froze, flashlight shaking, and whispered back, "Who? Give me the name." The spirit described everything, the killer, the motive, even where the knife was dumped. It was like a posthumous confession, full of regret and anger. When the coroners arrived, the spirit faded, leaving me stunned. Louisiana, with its voodoo folklore, made this seem plausible, but I knew it was madness. I anonymously logged the tips, and the case was solved days later.
I couldn't keep it to myself. In the locker room, I told my closest colleagues, Mike and Sarah, longtime partners. I saw the victim's ghost, talked to him. He told me who killed him. I expected support, but got laughter. Mike guffawed, "Harlan, you drinking on the job? Ghosts? That's horror movie stuff." Sarah mocked, "Maybe you need a vacation, buddy. Louisiana's got you nuts." They spread the story as a joke around the precinct, calling me Ghostbuster Harlan. I felt isolated, humiliated. The voices and visions worsened after that, as if the spirit had opened a door. Entire nights hearing screams from past victims, seeing shadows at crime scenes. My colleagues avoided me, whispering about craziness. Stress in a dangerous state like Louisiana is already high. Cop suicides are common,
and this pushed me to the brink. I started questioning every call, fearing the supernatural more than real criminals.
3 years dragged on like that, a gradual hell. The visions became daily, spirits begging for justice at shootouts, voices echoing unheard confessions. My performance tanked. Late reports, avoided patrols. The sergeant sent me for psych eval, diagnosing trauma-aggravated PTSD with hallucinations. My colleagues stopped laughing. Now it was pity. I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after seeing a murdered child's spirit follow me home, I requested discharge. "I can't do this," I told the chief. I sought treatment, therapy, psychiatrists specializing in cop trauma. Louisiana has resources for law enforcement vets, but nothing prepared for the supernatural. I was diagnosed with trauma-induced paranoid schizophrenia, though I knew it was real. Started heavy meds, weekly sessions. I left the badge behind, switching to a daytime security gig, away from night streets. But the scars remain.
To this day, I live on controlled meds, antipsychotics that dull the voices, antidepressants for the weight of memories. Louisiana remains dangerous, but my danger was internal, blended with the supernatural no one believes. Sometimes on quiet nights, I hear faint echoes, reminders of what I saw. I've become reclusive, avoiding talks about the past. My ex-colleagues, some still chuckle when we meet, but I know the truth. The night shift broke me, forcing me to confront the unseen. If I could go back, I'd tell young Jack, run from the dark. Today, I survive, but part of me died at that homicide scene, talking to the beyond. Let this be a warning. In states like Louisiana, the real and unreal intertwine, and not everyone comes out whole.
This is my last tour. The radio crackles to life with the usual static, a dissonant lullaby for the dark streets of Detroit, Michigan. A fine rain slicks the windshield, smearing the neon lights into melancholy blurs of red and blue. 10 years ago, I walked out of the academy with a puffed-out chest and a sense of purpose that feels naive to me now. I wanted to be the thin blue line, the wall between order and chaos in this city that bleeds so much. My first partner, Old Man Johnson, used to say that Detroit has a soul, an old and wounded one, and if you work the graveyard shift long enough, you start to hear it whisper. I laughed back then, thinking it was just the cynical poetry of a tired veteran. I had no idea how literal he was being. The weight of the ballistic vest on my shoulders feels heavier tonight, not from the gear, but from the burden of the years, the things I've seen, and most of all, the things I've heard when there was no one there to speak. Tonight, I turn in my badge and my gun. Tonight, I finally give up. It all started subtly, about 4 years into the job. Small things, easy to dismiss as fatigue or PTSD, the diagnosis they throw at us like a cheap blanket. During the long, quiet hours of the early morning, patrolling the abandoned industrial husks, I'd hear things. A muffled woman's scream from an empty warehouse that would go silent the moment I hit it with my spotlight. Indecipherable whispers on the radio frequency, in the dead air between dispatcher calls. In the beginning, I'd check everything. I'd go into buildings, gun drawn, heart pounding in my throat, only to find dust, rats, and the echo of my own pulse. My partner at the time, Martinez, started giving me strange looks. "You're wound too tight, man. You need a vacation," he'd say. But I knew it wasn't just stress.
It was as if the city's walls, soaked with decades of pain and violence, were beginning to leak their auditory memories. And for some reason, I was the only one tuned to that phantom frequency.
Over time, the sounds gave way to sights, or something close to them. Shadows in the corner of my eye, dark silhouettes that would dissolve like smoke when I turned to face them. Once responding to a fatal car wreck on I-75, I swore I saw the figure of a man standing next to his own mangled motorcycle, looking down at his covered body with a terrifying calm before he just faded into the morning mist. I started avoiding my rearview mirror during patrols, afraid of what I might see reflected in the back seat. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford without the help of a bottle of whiskey. Martinez stopped making jokes and began seriously suggesting I see the department shrink. I refused. How could I explain that I was seeing the echoes of the tragedies we responded to? They'd pull me off the streets, stick me behind a desk, make me a paper pusher. I was a cop, not a crazy person. I just had to be stronger to ignore the ghosts. But I was losing the fight, and the worst was yet to come.
The night that broke everything started with a standard call, domestic disturbance, possible shots fired. The address was a rundown apartment building on the east side, the kind of place that smells like mildew, boiled cabbage, and despair. Martinez and I took the stairs and found the door to apartment 3B ajar. Inside, the scene was a tragic cliché: overturned furniture, a smashed TV, and in the center of the living room, a young man lying in a pool of his own blood. Martinez went to check for a pulse, a pointless protocol, while I cleared the rest of the apartment. That's when I saw him. Standing near the window that overlooked a dark alley was the same young man from the floor. He was translucent, shimmering like heat haze off summer asphalt, and he was staring at his own body with an expression of confusion and sorrow. The air around me went ice cold. Every sound in the world, the distant sirens, Martinez's heavy breathing, the radio on my shoulder, faded away. There was only me and him, the newly dead, trapped in an absolute, unearthly silence. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes met mine.
I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe the insanity was finally taking over for good. My mouth moved before my brain could stop it. "What happened to you?" I whispered, and he answered me. Not with his mouth, but directly in my mind. It was a flood of images, sounds, and feelings. I saw the argument with his sister's boyfriend, felt the fear turn to rage, the shove, the glint of the kitchen knife the boyfriend grabbed from a drawer. I felt the cold shock of the steel piercing his chest twice. I saw the attacker panic, wipe the knife on a curtain, and hide it inside the toilet tank before scrambling out the fire escape. I saw all of it through his eyes. The whole experience lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When the connection broke, the spirit gave me one last look, a look of horrifying gratitude, and then faded like smoke against the dirty window pane. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, cold sweat pouring down my face. "Hey, you okay?" Martinez yelled, rushing to my side. I could barely speak. I tried to pull myself together, adrenaline and terror fighting for control of my body. "The sister's boyfriend," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "It was him. The knife, it's in the toilet tank in the bathroom." Martinez looked at me like I'd just grown a second head. He went into the bathroom, skeptical, and a few seconds later, I heard a sharp gasp. He came back out, holding the knife and a handkerchief. Later at the precinct, I tried to explain. I told my sergeant, the detectives, anyone who would listen. I told them about the spirit, the conversation, everything. The result was what I should have expected. First, pitying glances. Then, muffled laughter. The nickname Ghostbuster stuck pretty quick. Guys in my shift stopped talking to me, except to crack jokes about psychics and ectoplasm. Even though they got a full confession from the suspect and recovered the murder weapon exactly where I said it would be, they didn't believe me. They figured I had a snitch or was somehow involved. The truth was far more terrifying for them to accept. And if I'm being honest, for me too.
The next 3 years were a living hell. I couldn't take it anymore. Every crime scene was torture, waiting to see another pair of vacant eyes staring back at me from the other side. The whispers became constant, a chorus of victims begging for help, for justice, for peace. I asked to be taken off the street, worked a desk for a while, but it didn't matter. The ghosts didn't care about my job title. They found me everywhere. Finally, I surrendered. I turned in my resignation letter and sought help. Today, my life is governed by a schedule of therapy appointments and a cocktail of prescription meds that keeps the voices down to a low, almost tolerable hum. They diagnosed me with complex PTSD and stress-induced psychosis. Maybe they're right. Maybe my brain just shattered under the weight of a decade of seeing the worst of humanity. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the silence of my house gets too heavy, I still wonder, what if I'm not crazy? What if I just saw the truth, a truth that no one else was willing to see?